middle class is expanding rapidly. You cannot slow that down because you expect GDP to slow down. So again, it depends on a lot of things that are outside the control of theory. So we cannot, let me put it this way, if everything remains as it is, there are no changes in the Nigerian economy, then it's likely that the GDP will be slower. But from my own observations, because of a lot of investments going on in the system, in the economy, in the agricultural sector and other sectors, I don't expect that the country will remain the same way it is. So I don't expect that GDP will slow down significantly after the rebasing.
So will we see this translate to reality in terms of what is on paper to the average Nigerian on the street? Because that's what we see a lot of these days. We see a lot of good numbers on the paper. Would this translate, but most of this doesn't translate to the average Nigerian on the street. And so with the rebasing of Nigeria's GDP, do we expect to see improved living conditions for the average Nigerian?
Well, I've heard this several times, and I think it's largely misconception about what GDP is, the structure of the economy, and what is driving GDP. In terms of, let me answer that question in two parts. On the one hand, I do not agree that living standards of Nigerians have not improved. For example, the telecom sector, we know that with the increase and expansion of the telecom sector, the livelihoods of Nigerians, even in the rural areas, have improved. Now, the problem with GDP, when I hear this statement that is not affecting the average man on the street, I disagree. I would say that maybe it's not affecting him as much as he would have liked, but there are clear incidences of improvement. I've said this many times that the sheer number of international brands, from the Palms to the ShopRites to the different, to the Porsches to the Mangoes and so on, that are coming into Nigeria. They are coming in, they are hiring Nigerians. They are taking people off the street. They are putting foods on the table. They are giving people decent salaries. So you cannot say that things like this are not impacting on Nigerians. The entertainment industry, the way our entertainment industry has transformed the way we do culture and tourism in Nigeria, you cannot say that this is not impacting on people on the street. Like I said, the trick is ensuring that it impacts them more than it already is. On the other hand, if you look at the structure of Nigeria's GDP, you have a situation where three sectors, wholesale and retail trade, agriculture, and crude oil and natural gas, drive the economy. They constitute currently 70% of the economy. Now, these are not sectors that are high in employment generation. And they can keep growing, they can keep pulling the economy forward. But the trick is ensuring that this growth is inclusive, that a lot more people benefit from this growth. Now, if you go if you go and the same way Nigeria has the richest man and woman in Africa, is the same way Nigeria might have the poorest man and woman in Africa. So it's about inclusive growth, it's ensuring that this growth spreads out to more people. And that's actually where the trick is. So it's not that the numbers are not correct, it's just how do we ensure better equality of growth, better equality of development. I think that is where the key policy issue is, and not necessarily whether or not this growth is real or imagined.
Well, Dr. Yemi, I'm going to take you up now on the issue of data. Well, there's been a lot of talk that the quality of data from the National Bureau of Statistics doesn't quite add up. How would you react to this?
Well, I find that very amusing because anytime, I think it's just about the general lack of trust of government that has been there in existence for many, many years. I think we had 3 decades of military rule. Nigerians have grown to not trust their government. So even if a government is speaking the truth, you just have that instinctive apprehension. I noticed that once we produce data that is not necessarily favorable to a particular government, either on employment or poverty, nobody questions the data. We hear that the data has been well done, it's fantastic. They pat the National Bureau of Statistics on the back. But if we come back the next day and say, oh, unemployment, GDP is rising, or there's a better, or health indicators are improving, then there's always a doubt about the data. And I have to ask the question, isn't it the same organization that is producing both the positive and the negative data? So why do we believe the negative ones and assume the data doesn't quite add up when it is positive? Now I have to explain something. Our data at MBS is usually at an aggregated level. That's taking all the states across the country into consideration. It's very easy for you to go to a market in Lagos and see significantly rising prices, and then you go to a market in the rural areas where prices are moving a lot slower. But then on the aggregate, you are taking the high prices and the slower moving prices in the rural areas, and you are forming a national average. So the man in Lagos State will say these inflation numbers are understated. But the man in the rural areas, where the prices have not even risen significantly or even gone down, would say these inflation numbers are incorrect. But at the end of the day, MBS is taking into consideration an aggregate that takes into consideration everywhere across the country, as opposed to just one location. And what you find is that most people saying that it is at variance with what they see on the ground are probably looking at it from a very, very narrow area. And from
So,
that
Dr.
area,
Yemi,
of course,
what is the
national
Bureau
figures
doing?
and
Sorry
the
to cut
average
you in
figures
there. What
don't
is the
make sense
Bureau
to them.
doing to remove this notion from people's minds? Because something must definitely trigger, whatever insinuations are being peddled about, just like you said, that everybody can't totally agree with whatever figures the National Bureau of Statistics actually brings out. So what is the Bureau doing to remove this anomaly from the system, so to speak?
Transparency. Every time we publish our figures, we take our time to ensure that our methodology is published in detail. We sometimes have regular press briefings with the media, sometimes with stakeholders, just to basically explain to them how these numbers are calculated. Sometimes we even show them the returns that we get from the field. And I think it's about building credibility. It's about building confidence in numbers. And like I mentioned, once you have a system that is instinctively, naturally suspicious of its government, they would tend to be apprehensive, which I understand. That's why once the IMF or the World Bank or somebody outside government releases figures, we tend to believe them a lot faster than we would if the MBS does it. But the truth is that many of these organizations actually get their figures by working in collaboration with the MBS in the first place. So I always find it amusing why you would believe, for example, the World Bank releases a figure about Nigeria in collaboration with MBS, but if MBS releases the same figure, it is suspected. But if the World Bank or an external organization releases it, we tend to believe it. Again, I think it boils down to believability and trust, and that's what we're trying to do. Increase transparency, show our people that we are not trying to manipulate figures. And I have to state that since I have been a Statistician General, I have not had any interference actually from my government, which I think needs to be commended.
Well, just before I let you go, Dr. Yemi, let's look at the fact that the review of the rebasing of the GDP is coming over 20 years after. We know that most countries do it every 5 years. And as you were speaking earlier, you actually mentioned it. So after the rebasing, which we expect to see the figures out by December, is there going to be, a following in line with what is actually obtainable, according to global best practices, that in another 5 years, the rebasing of the GDP by the National Bureau of Statistics will be carried out?
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Not just in GDP, we are trying to ensure international best practice in all we do to kind of create an institution that is sustainable. We know that evidence-based planning is actually what can actually make a country develop much faster as it obtains in other countries. So we don't joke about what we do at the Bureau of Statistics. Exactly what you are, it's not just in GDP. We are doing it looking at our systems in other indicators, from health to education to unemployment to poverty. Various indicators we are looking at ensuring that what we do is international best practice. If you notice, in the last couple of years, for example, we've started publishing in advance at the beginning of the year a data release calendar, and that's basically to assist data users so they know our data is going to be released on a particular date. It helps them to plan, and we also ensure that whatever data we are producing is user friendly, is user driven. So at the beginning of the year, we talk to our stakeholders, our data users, and say, what kind of data would you like to see? Because the objective of data is to ensure that it is used for planning and for policy. And based on that, we design our programs. This is all international best practice. You will notice that a lot of people, for example, our GDP and our inflation numbers, including other data we produce, you actually know in advance what date. And before the official release date, you hear newspapers saying MBS is due to release its numbers in a couple of days. And I think that is all international best practice, and that's what we are targeting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yemi Hale, for speaking with us this morning on the program. Do enjoy your day.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I've been speaking with the Statistician General of the Federation and the Director General of the National Bureau of Statistics, Dr. Yemi Kale, and we've been looking at the rebasing of Nigeria's GDP and how much of this is expected to boost the economic expansion that we are actually looking forward to. I'll be joined in just a moment by a financial analyst, Wale Oluwo, and we'll still be looking at this topic, but then we'll look at it from the financial aspect. Although the statistician